Well, we have our posts and we have our tags, and now we need to link them together. Now, there are many solutions for this particular problem, and really none of them are the quote best solution because each of them have their own pluses and minuses. But we are going to use the most common solution, which is a linking or a mapping table. It's a very simple concept. We create a new table and we would have two columns, one for the post ID and then one for the tag ID. And then each record would represent an individual link. So for a particular post, we would specify a particular tag. And so a post could have multiple tags. So there would be multiple entries for a given post. So let's first of all create a table. And instead of having two columns, we're going to have three, because I am a firm believer in having a primary key in every table. Even when you don't think that you need a primary key, go ahead and create one, because it just takes a few seconds. And in those times when you realize that, yes, you do need a primary key, you're very thankful that you have it. Otherwise, you will hit your head on the desk thinking, why didn't I do that to begin with? So I'm creating a column called ID. It, of course, cannot be null. I set it as the primary key, and I set the identity specification to yes. Now, the other columns are the post ID, so post ID. It is an int, and it cannot be null. And then tag ID. That is an int, and that cannot be null. And let's call this posts tags links, or we can call it post tags map. That's a little bit easier to type. And this is going to be our mapping table. So let's refresh our table list and let's add some mappings. Now we have two posts. If we look at what we have 1 and 3, or at least those are the IDs. And if we look at tags, off screen I added 2. One has an ID of 2, and then one has an ID of 3. So inside of our mapping table, let's edit the top 200 rows, and we want to add the post ID of 1, and let's give it the tag ID of 2. And then the post ID of 2, or actually 3, is going to have the tag ID of 3. And let's go ahead and let's give the first post both tags. So the first post will have tags 2 and 3, and then the post with the ID of 3 will have the tag with the ID of 3. So now that we have some mapping information, let's look at the SQL statement that we are going to have to use. Now this is going to add some complexity, but in reality, any solution is going to add some complexity. So let's first of all select all from posts. And this, of course, is going to give us our two posts. But this isn't enough. We need to pull in the information from our map table. So we want to inner join our post tags map. And let's just call that M. Let's call posts P. And we want to join them on p.id equals m.postid. Now, when we execute this query, we're going to have 3 records because the first post has 2 tags. We are joining these 2 tables together, thus we have 2 records for the first post. Now, the post information itself is going to be the same, but the tag information, or at least in this case, the mapping information is going to be different. So here we have the post ID of 1 and the tag ID of 2, and then the post ID of 1 and the tag ID of 3. So whenever we are going to modify our repository, we are going to have to take this into account, which means that we are going to have to write some more code. But we're not finished here. We've got the posts and the mapping, but what we really want is the tag information. So let's add another inner join, and we want to join the tags table. Let's call it T, and we want to join them on t.id equals m.tagid. And then that will give us all of the information, the post information, the mapping information, and then the tag information. But we really don't need the mapping information. That in and of itself is kind of useless to us. It's useful for mapping the two things together, but as far as displaying that information in the browser, we really don't care about the mapping. So we can change what we select. We want everything from the post, so we can say select p.star to select everything from the posts table, but then we want to only select the information from the tags table. Now we could just do t.star here, but then we also have some columns that share the same name, like ID. So I want to be specific here, and we will select t.id as, let's say, tag ID. We can do t.name as tag name, and then t.url friendly name as tag URL friendly name. That way, whenever we are reading the results from a query, we know that this is related to the tag, this is related to the tag, as well as the ID. So if we run this query, everything should work, and we should only have the post information and then the tag information. So let's take this SQL, and actually no, this is not going to work in all cases because we are doing an inner join. That's only going to select the posts that have tags, and there will be some posts that do not have tags. Like, for example, let's open back up our mapping table, and let's get rid of the mapping for the post ID of 3 and with the tag ID of 3. So we can just delete that record so that only the first post has tags. Now, if we go back to our query, we are going to get 2 results. Although, no, we aren't. We are going to get an error. Although this query just worked just a second ago. Oh, it's because the word inner is selected. The Management Studio will take whatever is selected and use that as a query. So if you only wanted to use the first 2 lines as a query, that's all that you would have to select if you wanted to do that. But we want to run the whole query. So if we execute this, now we only see the first post, but we also want the second post, or at least I think that's the third post, because that is a post. And it's perfectly valid for a post not to have some tags. So I believe we want a left join in this case. So we will do a left join that will select the first post and its tag as well as the second post. So there we have all of our information. The tag information for the second post is all null. So that is something that we will need to take into account. So let's take this SQL statement and let's go to our code. And inside of the getAll method, we want to replace this simple SQL statement with our more complex. We are still selecting data, but we have these left joins. So let's concatenate everything just to make things a little bit more readable on screen. And unfortunately, this is not the only thing that we are going to have to change. This is going to cause us to process these results because we can no longer just return db.query. Because remember that we will have multiple records for a given post. So the first thing that we need to do is filter down the results that we get from our query. So let's store this in a variable called results, and then we will want to process this result, filtering out anything that we don't want. And the best way to do this would be to have another collection for our posts. So let's call it posts, and we will new up a list of dynamic. And at the bottom of the method, we are going to return posts.toArray. And so now we can process these results. We will do so with a for each loop, var results in results. And the first thing we want to do is check to see if we have a post with a given ID inside of our new posts collection. So let's call this post, and we will call this dynamic. Let's change this var to dynamic as well. Let's call this post, and we want to do posts single or default, where p.id is equal to result.id. Now, if post is null, then we know that that particular post is not yet inside of our posts collection. So if posts, or rather post is null, then we want to add that new post to our posts collection. So we will do post equal result, and then posts.add, and we will add in post. Now we do need to take tags into consideration. So as we are processing all of these results, we need to get the tag information and then put those on the appropriate post. So probably the best way of doing that would be to have a tags property on our post object, so that we would have post.tags, which would be a collection, and then we could get the tags that way. So we can create a new list of dynamic, and we will add our tag objects to this tag collection. So outside of this if statement, this is where we will get that tag information. But first of all, we need to see if we actually have some tag information. So we can say result.tag ID is equal to null, or rather if it's equal to null, then we can just go ahead and continue because we've already done all of the processing that we need to do. But if we do have some tag information, let's create an object called tag. This will be an expando object so that we can turn it into whatever that we want as far as what properties that we want. So let's add a using statement for system.dynamic, and then we want to say tag.id equals to result.tagid, and then tag.name equals result.tagname, and then finally tag.url friendly name is equal to result.tagurl friendly name. And then after we have created this tag object, we want to add it to the post.tags property, and this is a list, so we will just use the add method. Now, I admit that this seems like a lot of work, and it really is. But unfortunately, that's just the side effect of adding something like tags. If we implemented this in any other way, we would have to change our code to process something. There's no solution that would give us the actual results that we wanted straight from the database. Well, before we do anything else, let's run this and see if it works. I'm pretty sure that the logic is sound, so let's go to admin and then post, and we get an exception. And if we look over here, the problem is that web matrix.data.dynamic record does not contain a definition for tags. I was afraid of this. The database class, while it gives us an IEnumerable of dynamic, those dynamic objects are essentially read-only. We cannot change the shape of those objects. And by that I mean we can't just add a property to one of those objects. It's not an expando object. So we have really two options. We can switch to a data access library that gives us expando objects. I can think of one that does so. It's called Massive, and it's a very viable solution, but I'm not sure if we want to do that because then we have to change even more code. The other alternative is just to create our own post objects by creating an expando object and then assigning it an ID, a title, a content, and so on and so forth. Either way, we're going to have to write code. So I guess first of all, let's see if there is a NuGet package for Massive. If there is, then it might be worth it just to go ahead and switch and use that for our data access. But NuGet is not, there we go. So let's do a search for Massive, and let's see if we can just add that. We have massive.mysql, that's not what we want. Supermassive, never heard of it. Let's go to page 2. No, there's not a NuGet package. So that means we would have to go to the GitHub repository, copy and paste. And I don't want to do that. So we're going to take the second option, and that is to create our own expando objects and then populate the ID, the title, the content, date published, and so on and so forth. So let's first of all write a method that's going to do that for us. We will give it one of the dynamic objects from the database class, and then we will use that as the basis for creating our expando object. So let's make this private. It needs to be well, it doesn't need to be static, but there's no reason for it to be an instance method. And let's just have this return dynamic, create post object. We are accepting a dynamic obj, and then we will start off by creating a dynamic, which we will just call post. We will new up expando object. Then we will set post.id equals to obj.id. Then post.title equals obj.title. And then we will do the same thing for content. And we also need the date created. So post.date created equals obj.date created. Next is the date published. Then we have two others. One is the author ID. So post.author ID. And then finally, what is the third? The slug. The slug is very important. So post.slug equals obj.slug. And then we will just simply return post. So that will give us our post object. So we can call this method, let's see, where do we want to do that? Basically up here inside of this if statement. So instead of setting post equal to results, we will set post equal to create post object, passing in result, and then that will give us our dynamic object. And in fact, we can go ahead and take this line out and we can put it inside of this method. So now we can run this again and everything should work. We should still see the post information inside of the web page. We won't see the tag information because we haven't done anything with the tag information, but we run into something else and we see that we cannot implicitly convert type int to bool, and that is because I used an equal sign there, not an equality operator. So two equal signs, basic stuff. Let's run again, and hopefully now this will work. So admin and then post, and hooray, we get our list. Now, whenever we go to edit one of these posts, we do want to see the tags because this is where we can assign tags to a given post. So we need to go back to our repository and we need to modify the other methods, at least the other get methods. We need to essentially do the same thing. We want to use this more complex SQL statement, but we also want the where clause that's used inside of these other methods. So we can go ahead and take this SQL variable, let's paste it into this get method with the slug parameter, and then we will add on the where clause. So we can just delete that. We want to make sure that we concatenate here. And then the where slug equals and then our parameter. Everything else should be okay except that here we want var results equals to db dot, we need to execute the query method because if we have multiple tags, then we are going to have multiple records. So we need more than just a single record here. At this point, the code is going to look a lot like what we did inside of get all. We are retrieving the results from the query, and then we are processing those results with a for each loop. So it kind of makes sense to extract this code into a helper method. So let's grab the calling of db.query. Let's also grab the for each loop, and we will use this as a basis for a new method. So let's go down close to the bottom. Let's make it private static. Let's make it return an enumerable of dynamic. And for the lack of anything better, let's just call it doGet. I really don't like that name, but it's going to work for now. So we need the SQL statement. We also need the parameters for the values. So that's going to be params object and then values. And then we'll just paste that code in. Now we do need to grab the creation of the database object. So we will add that in. And we also need our list of posts because we are returning an enumerable. So we can add this really anywhere. Let's do it before we get the results from the database. So var posts equals new list of dynamic. Then we will get the results from the database. We will process those results. And then finally, before we exit the using statement, we will return posts.toArray. So let's go back to the getAll method. And instead of using this database class here, we are simply going to call our helper method. And we can call this results. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We can simply return doGet, passing in the SQL statement and nothing else. We can get rid of our post variable now, and now our getAll method is once again nice and clean. Now the get methods are going to be just a little bit different than what they are now. Instead of returning query single, we first of all want to get the results. So we will call doGet, we will pass in SQL and then slug in this case, and we need to see if there are anything inside of the results. So we will do return and then results.any. We want to return results.first. Otherwise, we want null. We also don't need this using statement with the database class, so we can get rid of that. and we have a nice clean get method. Now we just need to do the same thing in the other get method. So we can copy the code inside of that method, paste it in, and then all we will need to change is this, where ID equals that parameter, and then we will need to pass ID there. So this should work. Let's run it and let's see what we get. So we want to go to admin and then post. We want to click on the edit. First of all, this works, so our other methods should work as well. Let's edit the first post, and we get an issue here. Let's see. We must declare the scalar variable of 0 at 0. Well, that's our problem. We didn't pass the values to the query method. So we will do that. Let's run it once again, and we will go to admin and then post. Let's go to the first post, and that works. Now, notice that we don't have any tag information. That's because we aren't displaying it right now, but we could add a breakpoint down here whenever we return posts.toArray. Let's set the breakpoint there. Let's go back and refresh, and we can now examine the posts. Now we have only one item inside of posts, which is what we want. So we want to refresh on this results view. This will display all of the properties. We want to look at tags, so we will drill down here. We have a count of 2, which that's promising. If we keep drilling down and go to the results, then we should see the tag information. It has an ID of 2, a name of first tag, and then the URL friendly name is first-tag. So everything is working okay. We are processing all of our posts, getting only what we need, and we are getting the tag information from all of our records and applying them to the correct post. Now we're not finished with our post repository, because whenever we edit a post and we delete a post, we need to do something with the mappings as well. But we will get to that in the next lesson.